First of all, some apologies in the front row to David, Scott and Nick. I'm going to put some fairly controversial stuff up here, nothing too personal though. What I'm really going to focus on today is what's really happening at the coalface. It's all very fine to have great plans, great concepts, but what's really going on out there in the real environment? Because there are problems out there that are not being addressed, and that's really what I want to focus on. Anyone want to guess what that plane is?
737 MAX.
Perfectly correct. Why am I putting it up there?
Because of the MCAS system was faulty.
Absolutely. It was because it was a regulatory failure. Many of you won't probably know this, but the FAA largely relied on Boeing to carry out the tests for this plane as it came into service. Something like 75% of the testing was done by Boeing in self-certification. Lovely word, right? FAA didn't have enough knowledge, didn't employ anyone independently to test it, and then we move on. But is regulatory failure unusual? No. Think of examples around the world. Should we think about the car industry? Anyone think of Volkswagen? What about Mercedes-Benz, Ford, Chrysler? You can keep naming them. There's lots of them. Regulatory failure is really common. Facebook suddenly put $3 billion aside because it's not doing what the regulator agreed they were going to do with the regulator. So,
Building industry.
The building industry. You can all keep going. It's a common problem. The Boeing chairman, in a report to Wall Street journals, to Wall Street advisors, said that he had to thank the FAA for the streamlined process that they went through to bring the plane out to rush the MAX out to service. Comforting, isn't it? Why were they rushing the machine out? Because they were competing with a firm called Airbus, which had brought out a 320 Nano, which was very economical, and so they had to get a plane to match it. They brought out a 737. They copied the 737 model they had, stuck more powerful motors, stuck limits on the side, and the problem was the plane went up too easy. So guess what they did to solve that problem? Put in a system called MCAS. Did they test it properly? Well, I think the answer you know. But of course, when the shit hit the plane or the plane hit the ground, take your choice, what was the reaction of Boeing? Denial. Okay, it's not our fault, pilots, they're damn bad pilots. Well, it's bloody hard to argue with a black box. All right, Ethiopian airline pilots did exactly what was required of them, and they hit the ground probably going 400 miles an hour plus. Right? So regulator failure is common, and so is institutional failure, particularly when there are conflict of interests. So let's go to Australia. You know all about institutional failure in Australia, and I'm not going to repeat it. But there was also regulatory failure. How come ASIC and APRA managed in this incredibly highly regulated environment for several years to allow all these things to go on? How come there were 52 reports, right? And what sort of progress did we get? So the solution is what? And I'm delighted that David's saying things are going to happen. So let's get on to Fairyland. What was the initial reaction in New Zealand to what was going? We're different over here from the two most financially important people in New Zealand, from the Reserve Bank Governor and the head of FMA. It's called denial, it's shades of Boeing, right? It's Boeing all over again. Nothing's wrong here, folks. It's unbelievably naive, because it's the same firms, right? Jack Ryan was the head of advice for AMP in Australia. He also was the managing director of the New Zealand operation. He admitted on the cross-questioning of the Royal Commission that he'd lost count of the number of times they deliberately misled the regulator. So it's different over here in New Zealand. No, it's not. So the collective response in New Zealand was a giant yeah right. Thank goodness. I was party to a group of independent financial advisors. We wrote an open letter to the advisors. We were only a small part of the yeah right response. Over here you can see a certain lady in the middle of the picture there. Do you see yourself there? And who also joined us in the response. And you'll be interested that the ANZ came out and actually said we were right. So what's wrong with the default funds? They're conservative when the member's objective is retirement. Default providers failed to move members out of what was supposedly temporary funds. The default funds, particularly the 5 banks, assisted by A and B, who we heard today have got 68% of the KiwiSaver investment default funds, invested in each other. Default funds were wrongly marketed to the public as low risk. They're not a low risk in terms of return. It's the last place you should be when you're going to retirement and you're 18 or 20. But look at what also was going on. It wasn't just the FMA that wasn't performing. What about the IRD? All right, if you enrolled as a default member, or you auto-enrolled because your employer had selected the scheme, you were automatically taxed at 28%. Right? And it was 3 or 4 months before that data even got to the default supply. And of course the data was incomplete. There was no way in the application process that the person could record that they were entitled to a lower rate. And guess how many of the younger people, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds were joining? Right? They're all entitled to 10.5% rate, not 28%. So the IRD was very unhelpful. It even brought out those forms new here in April this year. It still didn't allow space for a tax rate to be loaded. So if you go to the IRD website and try to find out how to correct your pirate tax rate, you've got to be a damn good searcher. But there's a regulator called the FMA that didn't act on the non-performance of the default suppliers. I'll redrew this one. I heard today that the FMA have actually started to have discussions around that. So there's been a really big failure by the regulator to act around default schemes. It was always seen as temporary funds that were supposed to move them out. So let's look at the KiwiSaver reports year by year. 2010, right, we're going to move on. You've got to have a long-term investment, let's get an appropriate fund. 2011, same report. 2012, there is a dire to adopt longer term. 2013, this is laughable now in terms of what I just told you, that the FMA has an interest in working with the IRD to ensure that these things have a minimal impact to members. So, let's go on to 2014. There was a big review of the default schemes. By far the majority of things came out and said, let's put life stages in, let's put balance funds. I think there was only 2 people that said stay with conservative, and one of them was ASP, which conducted its own survey and came out with a magnificent submission that New Zealanders were more conservative than any other people in the world. Yeah, right. But what was the result? There was no change. We were put back into having conservative default funds. You've got to ask yourself why. Well, 2015, 16, and 17, the KiwiSaver reports had more talk. In 2018, they came out with this. We've been reporting on this activity since 2016. Last year, we made concerns clear to the CEO. I belong to a world where you act, where real things matter. How much time do you think it would have taken the head of the FMA to pick up the phone and ring Jack Ryan and say, we don't think your performance as a default supplier is any good, and unless you can get your conversion rate up, we're going to stop the flow of default suppliers to you. How fast do you think you've got a reaction? You wouldn't even have to go through a consultation. Don't need to have a report. It's self-evident. Here's the figures. This is insulting. AMP. These are the active members, the members that moved out of the default scheme because the default supplier converted them into another fund in their fund. 2% for AMP, 2% of 112,000. You can go through the others. Westpac's not much better. ASB's not much better. So on and so forth. Booster at the top was 15. ANZ default, pretty good. So maybe they didn't have the power to do it. Maybe it wasn't easy to do it. Well, there's the information in the 2017 report. They certainly have got the power to do it. They could have terminated the flow, they could have applied to remove them as default suppliers. So there's my first recommendation. That this review blow away everyone that hasn't got a decent track record. Why are they so slow to move out? Ask yourself why. If 30% plus of the default funds is invested in term deposits, who wins when the term deposits are the other banks in your group or yourself? It's a complete conflict of interest, which is the core of problems in all investments. So, but there's the worst thing, more bad news. And this comes back to, let's look at the taxation impact. The average KiwiSaver balance was 17,000 odd. The average return was 7%. Less the average fees, there's your around $1,000. So, what's the impact of the overtaxation if you're on 17.5 and you're being taxed at 28? It's $109 overtaxed each year. If you should be on 10.5, you're being overtaxed 181. Well, maybe if you're in your first couple of years of KiwiSaver, you haven't got 17,000. So I did the numbers for the default scheme, and the numbers basically work out the same. The tax is more important than the fees. So I move on one more step. So let's talk about fees in a bit more detail. I'm sorry to disagree with you, Mary, but there are more important things than fees. And the number one thing that's more important than fees is the fund type. Go up the side, defensive, conservative, balanced, growth, aggressive. Those are the individual dots off the KiwiSaver, the sorted side. It's the FMA's KiwiSaver tracker. And what's odd about it, the crosses, by the way, are some of the default funds. The most important decision you make is the sort of fund, because here are the fees along the bottom, and you could take a range of about 0.9 or 0.8, and then you've got to take tax off it, and you've covered 80% of the KiwiSaver schemes, correct? So what really mattered was the fund type. So why the hell are we in conservative? Fund type matters more than fees. Now we can move on to the new legislation. Sorry to be a cynic, but one of the biggest things you can do in financial education is teach your kids to be cynics. Look for where are the conflicts of interest. Okay, if the FMA and the IRD have not correctly managed 9 KiwiSaver funds, how the heck are they going to cope with the number of tax they're going to have to manage under the new legislation? Right, it's mind-boggling. I've split 12 specific recommendations, so I'll fly through them. Most of these are self-evident. For goodness sake, fix the tax. It's just do it. You don't have to do, and don't need anything else to do it. You could stop the IRD providing wrong KiwiSaver balances. IRD must provide the default suppliers all the contact details, make sure the information gets to the default suppliers. 5 or 6 of them should be blown into Kingdom Come, because we've got to grow out of this age of being this little wee nest where we've got 5 banks that take care of everything. Sell you insurance, sell you mortgages, drive up house pricing because there's plenty of credit. Thank God Mr. Orr is at least trying to make them more capitalised. I dispute this whole concept of a charitable trust. It's the same thing as sanitarium, simplicity, maybe not for profit, but not a charitable trust. Default providers must need a concrete standard. We're dealing with business here, 10% or out. You know, if you haven't shifted out 10% of the members, some such target. You don't need to keep calling all sorts of other things default funds. And this comes to the new Act. One of the biggest problems the public face is they've got not a clue who they're dealing with. right? When you get, I can read out some of the labels for people. You could be a wealth management, a retirement consultant, a financial consultant. It's going to be chaos under the new legislation, right? I've got 1 minute to straighten out the chaos. Okay, you should have to give your nominated representative. You should have to say what your specialty is. The default funds have got to be one of those. Financial education is vitally important. I'm heavily involved in doing so, along with my business partner Rachel. We've run something like 500 kids through it. It's not just about the literacy, it's about all aspects around work. The regulators have to keep things simple. Stop diving and making lots of splits. You either deliver or you're out. Simple rules, it's business, let things happen. The default suppliers didn't move up to their contract performance, they should have been fired. Thank you.